My name is Dr. Steve Kapp. I'm a former obstetrician and the president of SecuReach Systems, a company that provides the technology for critical test management as well as communicating test results to patients. I talk to people all over the country, so in the beginning I like to do the passenger jokes out of the way in the beginning, especially since I'm a retired gynecologist. My background is I went to Ohio State Medical School, trained in acting and practiced in Cleveland for 25 years. Quit 5 years ago when the malpractice rates in Ohio went nuts. Formed this company, designed this system. So my background is from the other side of this ledger here. It is the physician office and what can they do. My point, my purpose of this talk today is to show that there are technology available to improve patient safety in what both Phyllis and Paul outlined described. My first disclaimer is simply this, is that many of my slides will be a system of tracking and communication. I'm using my own system because I'm familiar with that. This is not Crittenden promotion or anything like that. That's not the thoughts of anyone on this panel too. It's just a way to let you know there are systems out there that you may well be unaware of. Just to begin, this Running Institute of Medicine, I find the trial lawyers like to quote these statistics a lot. Up to 100,000 Americans die from medical errors annually. There's a group of family docs in Virginia, headed by Dr. Steve Bull, who studied these types of errors. And what they found was, although 83% of the errors are mistakes in treatment or diagnosis, which you expect, fully 2 or 3 were just errors in communication. Those are the kind of things that a tracking communications can't prevent. In any event, Phyllis showed this very clearly. In the outpatient setting, the various handoffs that occur, and things that can go wrong in any of these handoffs can result in a calamity. So let's just run through a couple losses. I'm not going to belabor this, not with this group. But every one of these would have been prevented had a tracking communication system in place. First one's pretty obvious. The woman gets a mammogram, shows a lump, and the test gets lost, and it really doesn't matter how it got lost, whether it's miscommunicated or never sent back to the office. Without a tracking system, the office didn't realize the test had not come back, so they didn't do anything. And the woman, as most patients assumed, if she didn't hear anything, it was fine. So nothing was done. 10 months later, she's got metastatic breast cancer. Sure, it's a large award, but the real tragedy here is she lost 10 months of treatment. That's a tragedy in all of these. This woman in Seattle has a blood clot in her leg. It's on Crittenden. Seen the opposite. The blood study says she's on the right dose, and it's elevated. She had too much Crittenden on her. But the test got lost. It wasn't reported to the office. The office didn't change the medication. And as a result, on the same too high medication, Crittenden, she has a stroke or permanent brain damage as a result. And this one I hate to even show as an obstetrician. Anti-Gale antibodies are part of an antibody screen you do on every pregnant woman. And it was positive, but the lab didn't report it. And no one in that office in all 10 of those prenatal visits noticed that that test did not come back. They didn't do anything. They didn't do the proper follow-up. You have stillborn baby to term, all because of the results. But I would submit that when you look at this overall process, we do have to take a step back and look at what happens in the physician offices. You also have to be able to know that if the physician orders a test, that test is actually done. Critical test reporting starts when the result comes back. You really have to move it back further, because if the clinician doesn't know that they ordered a test and wasn't completed or the patient didn't do it, then you have situations like this. It's the last case that will show you, but there's a rehab unit. And the person comes in for rehab again for DBT. And so on the initial visit, they draw the studies, and the studies were elevated, so the doctor appropriately lowered the Crittenden in order for the repeat test to be done in the matter of a few days. Well, the test was never done. They offered the rehab unit, never ordered it. They didn't get it done. The patient had an abdominal bleed as a result of too much Crittenden and ended up dying. In this particular instance, the physician got off because he ordered it, but the facility had to sell because they did not get the test done. Well, I think we can all agree that any system that would address these different handoffs and make sure that nothing happens to them would be a good system. It would certainly lower indemnity rates, but even more so, it would improve patient safety. Well, how are physicians doing on this? This was a study that probably, if you didn't hear about this, you heard about it on the news because it got a lot of play last summer. Dr. Castellino works in the Cornell Medical School group, and what they wanted to know is they just did a retrospective study trying to find out how often do physicians not report abnormal results. Sounds pretty simple. So what he did, he took 5,000 patients, he surveyed 23 different settings, part academic, part community-based, and I don't think it's going to surprise anybody here that they found that 7.1% of the time, the office either failed to notify the patient about an abnormal test, or they didn't document it. And anyone knows that it's not documented in court of law, it just didn't happen. That's amazing. What's even more amazing to me is that the range was from 0 to 26%. So some practices did very well, but one practice, 26% of the time they didn't notify people of past results. I mean, my homework assignment, if I were an underwriter here, would be when I get home, check and see if you're covered one of those practices. This was me in my other life. I ordered 2,500 tests in a year, I counted it. So 2,500 tests, if you multiply by 3 calls, which some studies say it's 4, that is a lot of phone traffic. And we are expecting the physicians to be perfect on this. They can't miss one and end up being one of these cases. So what could be any proposed solution to these problems has to address this issue. It has to be time and cost effective in the doctor's office. You cannot give them anything, they're going to have to hire more people. It's a dead end. All right, let's talk about currently what happens with critical test reporting. Well, the most common way across the country is either the lab or the hospital personnel or the doctor calls the referring doctor or calls the office and says, we got a panic value, we got an abnormal result. What is wrong with this? Well, a couple things. One, you've got physicians trying to catch up with other physicians. And number two, what always happened to me is that my radiologist friends would call me and I'd be in the car and they say, you know, Dr. Patton, Ms. Jones's mammogram shows calcification. You need to get a surgery to do this. Well, that's all well and great. I'm driving. Back then, you couldn't do all the stuff we could do now in the car. Back then, I'd have to stop and call somebody. Well, I don't know what's going to happen. It really did help in terms of improving patient care. What it did help is it covered that radiologist because he dutifully wrote down that he notified. The result was passed on, but I would tell him, okay, send it to the office. We'll take care of it unless it was really brings value. There are better ways. And this is what I'd like to show you. And my second disclaimer is as I go through my system very briefly. These are all fictitious names and tests. Don't send the HIPAA police out. These are all made up things. So, to begin with, any patient within the system has to have some way of getting secure messages. So our system provides a plastic card that has a toll-free number to call, a unique box number assigned to that patient, and a PIN number that's computer generated that the patient can change for further security. So you can see this is a secure voicemail system. The only person who listens to the message is that patient him or herself. So therefore, when you're leaving results for that particular patient, you're not saying call for the results. You're saying the mammogram show this, your caption show that. It satisfies HIPAA because only the patient can listen to it. Now let's walk through the critical test reporting. Let's take it from, as Phyllis showed, let's take it from the ordering of it and the communication all the way to the patient receiving. So in our system, the lab personnel, the doctor, the floor nurse, whoever it is that has the critical result, does not use a telephone to put a result in. They're actually dictating the message online directly into the internet application. So the way this looks like is online, again, you're not using the phone, you look at the result, you click abnormal, which all of these are, and what shows up looks like an old-time dictaphone. Using a USB port microphone, the message is dictated directly into the internet application, not even using the telephone. So they would say, you know, Dr. Patrick, there's caption back, it's very abnormal, it's going to be follow-up, and they're done. They click, they record, click add, and there's no phone calls, holding, waiting, messaging, nothing, just dictated, that's the end of it. Once that's in our system, SecuReach then takes over. Our application calls, emails, and texts the providing physician, the provider, with a general message. It's a message. Call the number, the toll-free number to get that result. Now, the provider, and this is an escalating message that is programmed into the system through the referring group, facility, hospital, whatever it is. So once that physician gets that phone call, they do one of two things. Either they pick it up, or they get the message and they call the number. Either way, once they're online, and once they're on the phone, they have a couple options. They enter their own code, which they have, which they can modify, and they can make their own 4-digit code. And then they're listening on the phone to that message that was dictated from the source. Once they do that, they have three options. They can notify the patient, the office, or back to the center, all within the same call. So let's just walk through these real quick. The provider can click a prompt to dictate a message, which then goes into our system again. This is all on the same phone call, saying, you know, we got your pap smear back and you need to do follow-up, or possibly whatever it is. Our system then again calls the patient now with a generic message saying you've got a message, call the number on your card now. They call in, put it in the box, and listen to the message. With one phone call, you've closed the loop, not only to the providing the ordering physician, but to the patient in a very timely manner. Very, very slick. Now, they can also dictate a message, send it to the office. Say, oh, this, I want you to do this, this, and this, and send it to the office securely. And they can pick that up, or they can click another prompt and go back to the person who originated the message if there's some clarification. So, technology can help these problems. The sending source via real-time daily alerts, no need to know right away if the message hasn't gotten through. They can start the system again to start the calls again. This takes away calling centers and takes away so much of the work, and also documents everything for them. I mentioned before about the offices themselves. In our system, the office at a glance can see what messages they've ordered that haven't been completed. They can see what messages, what tests they ordered haven't been completed. They can see what messages haven't been received by the patient. But with our system of calls, 94% of the time we put it in and we get the result. So now we're really changing things in terms of making sure that nothing falls through the crack. You know, to use our system, all we need is internet connection. Just to give you an idea of the cost, this is not expensive. I mean, the average physician is paying about $100 a month for the whole system. So it's not, don't think that this is something that physicians can't afford. And multiple testimonials on any kind of automated system will show how much time it saves within the office. This happens to be a GYN clinic. But what they found is that putting a system like this in reduced the time that their nurse practitioners spent on all this phone calls back and forth by 66% was a huge cost savings for their practice. What we think on this panel is that underwriters and claims that the carriers are in a unique position to not only affect patient care, but also improve the bottom line. And our bent is still towards improving patient safety. You know, but the thing is, you have to be sure anything you put in any kind of office really is being used. You can't have something where physicians sign up for some shelfware and don't use it. What we do in our system, we can make the risk managers of the company super users so they get access to statistics as to whether it's being used. We can give them our data. The typical OB-GYN puts in X amount of messages, and this is what your doctor's doing to tell that. Or groups like SecuReach can actually have a third-party group auditing and making sure the processes are aligned. Anything we put in has to work. The last slide that I'll show you, I'll turn over to Brian. Simply this. I was interested in Paul's slide when he talks about no medical misadventure. Look at the payouts and the costs and everything else. These are mal-occurrences that are so egregious and terrible. And even though you don't have any, you don't really think anything was done wrong, you're afraid to try the case because of what can happen. Well, a good system in place can give you something like this. And this is a case study, so I have it grayed out. This doctor was sued for failure to diagnose, and he was using our system. So he got notification of lawsuit. He was very relieved to see when he went online that on the message page, he dictated a result 3 years ago on the 21st of February. And the patient picked it up the 23rd. He calls us up, we go into our database. We can tell him to the second when that patient called in to get that result. We compare it to our phone bill at that exact time. Patient called in and listened to it. And then finally, the message ID corresponds to wavefront. We put it on the CD and anyone can listen to exactly what that doctor told that patient. This is the kind of information you can have in these cases that Paul responded, and it would give you a pretty good